Right now, you are making a decision. You might not even know what it is yet, but somewhere inside you, two completely different systems are fighting over what you do next. And only one of them is you. Or maybe neither of them is. That depends on which one you ask. This sounds like science fiction. It is not. It is neuroscience. And once you understand what is actually happening inside your skull, you will never think of yourself the same way again. Your brain is not one thing. It never was. It is two distinct hemispheres, a left and a right, connected by a dense bridge of roughly 200 million nerve fibers, called the corpus callosum. In a healthy brain, those fibers shuttle information back and forth so fast that you experience yourself as a single, unified person. But what happens when you cut that bridge? What happens when the two sides can no longer talk to each other? The answer is one of the most disturbing discoveries in the history of neuroscience. You do not get half a person. You get two. In the 1960s, a neurosurgeon named Joseph Bogan, working alongside the Nobel Prize-winning researcher Roger Sperry, began performing a radical surgery on patients with severe epilepsy. The seizures in these patients were catastrophic. Whole-brain electrical storms that no medication could stop. The solution Bogan and Sperry proposed was to sever the corpus callosum entirely, cut the bridge, contain the storm to one side. The surgery worked. The seizures stopped. But what came next was something nobody had fully anticipated. When Sperry and his colleague Michael Gazzaniga began testing these patients, who came to be known as split-brain patients, they found something that shook the foundations of how we think about the self. Each hemisphere of the brain, now operating independently, had its own perception of the world, its own preferences, its own intentions. And critically, neither hemisphere knew what the other was doing. Here is what that looks like in practice. In one famous experiment, researchers showed a split-brain patient two different images simultaneously. One flashed to the left visual field, processed by the right hemisphere, and one flashed to the right visual field, processed by the left. When asked what they saw, the patient described only the image their left hemisphere had received, their speaking self. But when asked to point with their left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, they pointed to a completely different object, the object their silent half had seen. One brain. Two answers. Two truths. What makes this even stranger is what happens when the two hemispheres disagree on what the body should do. Gazzaniga documented cases where a split-brain patient's left hand would undo what the right hand had just done. One hand buttoning a shirt, the other unbuttoning it. One reaching for a book, the other pushing it away. This phenomenon became known as alien hand syndrome. One of your hands stops belonging to you. Or rather, it belongs to the other you. Now here is where it gets personal. Because you do not need a surgery to have two selves. You already do. The neuroscientist Ian McGilchrist spent decades studying the divided brain, and what he found is that even in a typical, fully connected brain, the two hemispheres operate according to fundamentally different logic. The left hemisphere is the narrator. It takes in information, simplifies it, and builds a story. It categorizes. It labels. It is the voice in your head that says, "I know what this is. I know what I think. I have a plan." The right hemisphere does something else entirely. It holds the full, ambiguous, embodied experience of the world. The feeling that something is wrong before you can say why. The gut sense, the emotion that has not yet been named. McGilchrist argues that most of what you call conscious thought is actually the left hemisphere's post hoc narrative, a story assembled after the fact to explain what the right hemisphere already felt. You feel something first, then your left hemisphere wakes up and writes a sentence about it. And that sentence is what you call your decision, your opinion, yourself. This is not a metaphor. It is biology. The psychologist Jonathan Haidt at New York University describes something similar with his now famous metaphor. the rider and the elephant. The elephant is your emotional, intuitive self. Enormous, ancient, driven by deep evolutionary impulses you have no direct access to. The rider, sitting on top, is your rational, conscious mind. The rider thinks they are in control. The rider gives directions. But when the elephant decides to go somewhere, the rider goes along. And afterward, the rider comes up with a very convincing explanation for why they chose to go there. You have probably felt this. You decide to eat the thing you said you would not eat, and then your mind explains, reasonably, that you deserved it, that one time does not matter, that you will start again tomorrow. The explanation feels true. It feels like reasoning, but the decision was already made somewhere else, by something that does not respond to arguments. So which one is the real you? Here is what neuroscience suggests. Both. And neither. What you experience as a unified self, a single person with a continuous identity, a consistent set of values, a coherent life story, is a construction. Not a lie, exactly, but an edited version. A greatest hits album assembled in real time by your left hemisphere, set to a narrative that makes you the protagonist of your own life. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has spent his career studying patients with damage to the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain most associated with rational thought and decision-making. What he found dismantled a very comfortable assumption. These patients could reason perfectly. They could solve logic problems. They could describe, in accurate detail, the consequences of different choices. But they could not decide. Without access to the emotional, embodied signals that your right hemisphere generates, what Damasio called somatic markers, rational thought alone is paralyzed. You do not make decisions with your logic. You make them with your feelings. And then your logic explains them. This means the thing you call your mind, the thinking, planning, reasoning self you identify with, is not the author of your life. It is the editor. Maybe the publicist. There is a version of you that wakes up before you do. It has already assessed the morning, the light, the temperature, the emotional residue of yesterday, and decided, broadly, what kind of day this is going to be. By the time you open your eyes and think your first thought, the shape of your experience has already been suggested by something operating below the level of language. Your left hemisphere wakes up, looks around at what the right hemisphere has already felt, and begins its narration. Today is going to be hard. Or, today feels possible. And you believe it, because you think you thought it. Split brain research has one more gift for you, and it is the most unsettling of all. When Gazzaniga's team created situations where the right hemisphere caused the patient to do something inexplicable, reaching for an object, making an unexpected choice, and then asked the left hemisphere why they did it, the left hemisphere did not say, "I do not know." It invented an answer. Instantly, fluently, confidently. The patient would say something like, "I wanted to get a drink of water," or, "I just felt like stretching." The answer was completely fabricated. The left hemisphere had no access to the real reason. It had not been consulted. But it could not tolerate a gap in the story, so it filled the gap with a story that sounded true. Gazzaniga named this mechanism the interpreter. The left hemisphere is an interpreter that runs constantly, generating explanations for your behavior after the fact, with total confidence, and with no access to the actual cause. You are not watching your life and making sense of it. You are narrating it, improvising, and calling the improvisation memory. Now think about the decisions you made today. The thing you chose not to say. The route you took. The person you thought about. The feeling you cannot name. Somewhere on the other side of the bridge, there is a version of you that already responded to all of it. In images, in instincts, in embodied sensations that never became words. And the you that is reading this right now, the verbal, logical, story-making you, is meeting all of that for the first time, constructing a self out of it in real time, and calling it memory. You are not one person pretending to be simple. You are two systems pretending to be one. And the seam between them, the place where feeling becomes thought, where sensation becomes sentence, where the elephant moves and the rider starts talking, that seam is where you actually live. Right now, something inside you is responding to this idea. Before you form a word about how you feel, before you decide whether you believe it, there is already a reaction happening, somewhere below the bridge, in the part of you that cannot speak but has never stopped watching. That part knew what kind of day this was going to be before you opened your eyes.